Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The event will be starting shortly. We kindly ask all delegates to make their way back to the conference room and take their seats. We appreciate your cooperation and look forward to an engaging and productive session ahead. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready for an unforgettable experience as we kick off the GTAC 2026 Public Economics Conference. Guiding us through every moment is none other than a master of conversations. He's the dynamic host of Ubuntu Sunrise on South Africa's Ubuntu Radio, a trusted moderator for leaders and changemaker. With his signature blend of gravitas, warmth, and insight, he will lead us with energy, clarity, and inspiration. Please give a thunderous welcome to your Master of Ceremonies, Vusi Maupa.
Good morning, yeah! Let's go! Wow, welcome back. Good morning everyone. Welcome to day 2 of a GTAC 2026 Public Economic Conference. So good to see so many of you. Some of you are a bit hangovered. I understand some of you went out and about yesterday. So we understand and hope the coffee will help. But we'll try and do something to see if your problems are solved immediately. So as you know, yesterday we laid a powerful foundation that is digging into the data, unpicking the trends. We also shed some light on the realities behind South Africa's youth unemployment crisis. Today we step boldly into the heart of solutions. We're looking from job creation to job access and interventions that can truly connect young people to these opportunities. And Prof. Borat said, young people are people between the ages of 20 and 30. So if you're within that bracket, we are here to help you. So I'd really like to ask you to bring the same energy we had yesterday, and the curiosity as well as the drive to make this day 2 so impactful. Before we dive into today's program and get into underway with all the formalities and the content that we have prepared for you, I will give you some time to complete a survey. Very few of you yesterday completed a survey as you were rushing out to network outside. We understand you couldn't get a chance to complete a survey. So the survey is available now on the platform. If you go online on the platform, they'll post the link there, and we'll give you a few minutes to complete that. And this goes to our online audience as well. Please, online, please do complete the survey for you to, the event can only be better with your feedback. So your feedback really shapes how this conference go. So please take a moment and let us know how yesterday went, and so we could live up to your expectation. So we're gonna give you a few minutes for you to easily and comfortably complete that survey for us. Selector, just a nice sound as they complete the survey, please. All right, let's hope you completed your surveys by now, and we can only count on you for that. Now that I said that yesterday was a bit a busy day, so some of you were cocktailing and networking, and you decided to take it to some of the local amenities here that sell something hot or two. So I saw a few of you, and for us to get awake, when we tried this last year, I ended up being the only one, well, a year before last, I ended up being the only one on stage that was left. So I beat the challenge. So I'm inviting you. My selector will play me the song, and before he does, I'll please ask you to all please stand. And we're going to get a bit of energizer and see if we can get over the babalas that we have now and get ready for the day. Are you guys ready for that, right? Right. Selector, as they are starting, I'm just going to demonstrate. So you do what I do, not what I say. So the rule is very simple. You do what I do, not what I say. And online as well, if you're home, please stand and join us in this. It will also help you. I know some of you are probably attending this from the comfort of your blankets. Please step out of the bed and you do what I do, not what I say. Right. So I'm gonna go. When I touch my knees, you touch your knees. When I touch my waist, you touch your waist. When I touch my shoulders, you touch your shoulders. When I touch my head, you also do touch your head. Simple, right? I touch my knees, you touch your knees. I touch my waist, you touch your waist. I touch my shoulder, you touch your shoulder. I touch my head, you touch your head. But you do what I do, not what I say. Is it right? Should you get it wrong, you sit down. I just want to see who will be the last man standing. So we're all looking forward for the last man standing. Oh, last woman and man standing, right? To be politically correct. So we will give you a huge applause on that. So selector, let's hit the song and let's go. Right. Okay. You all can hear me, right? Let's go. Now let's go. Knees, shoulders, head. Knees, waist, shoulders, head. Knees, waist, shoulders, and head. I'm saying knees. Oh, sit down. Let's go. We're going to go again, right? It's easy. Right. Let's go. Hey, guys, ready? Sit down if you missed it, right? Knees, shoulders. Oh, sit down. All right. I'm watching you. Let's go. Head, knees, shoulders, waist. Head, knees, shoulders, and head. Sit down. Let's go. I'm looking for that last man and women standing. We can do better. Let's go. Head. Oh, sit down. All right. You're going to try again. I think you missed it. Did you get it? All right. Let's go. Waist. Oh, most of you sit down. Right. Okay. We're going to get this right. I see some good contenders there. Let's go. Waist, shoulders, head, and knees. Head, knees. Mari, you missed it. Right. You still want some more? Knees. Those are not knees. Knees. You missed it, right? Shoulders. Sit down. All of you there, sit down. You too. Down. I said knees, okay? Knees. No, those are not knees. These are not knees, right? These are not knees. Sit down, please. I'm watching you. Yeah, you missed it. You too, you got it wrong, did you? All right, one more time. Head, shoulders, knees, and shoulders. Oh, we all missed it. Thank you so much. Give yourself a round of applause. I saw some of you were cheating there, yeah? Some of you kept on standing even if you got it wrong. But I'm glad you guys played along and you got the energy up. And my guy in pink kept on missing it here in front. And he kept on standing. I'm keen to hear his voice. Where's the roving mic in the room? I'm so keen to hear. He kept on missing it, but always standing up. I wondered what his coat is all about. Do you have a roving mic for him, please? If you can just... Oh, there it is. Thank you, Puso. If you can just introduce yourself to us, where you're from, what coat did you receive and what does it mean to you, please?
Okay.
Please give him a round of applause. He's wearing for smart. Pink and white.
Oh, greetings to everyone, all protocols observed. Speaking is Mr. S.O. Kubisa from KZN, but not University of KZN, University of Zululand, all the way from the rural areas of Mbangeni. So, my coach, it goes to say, the future of work is inclusive, or it's not the future at all. So basically, from my own understanding, since we all gathered here today to discuss the major prevailing issue in South Africa of unemployment, or specifically youth unemployment, but it does not specifically mean nobody is employed. It is simply because it is not everyone within the category of youth. So basically, from my own understanding, the code, it goes to an extent to basically mean we are fighting for the majority of the youth to be employed. Thank you.
Give it up for Mr. Siphelele, all the way from Empangeni, not at the university, but Empangeni. Thank you so much, Siphelele, for that and for the reflective reflection in your quotation you did have there. Now I understand why you were standing up. You're from deep down in KwaZulu-Natal. We respect you, sir. Thank you so much. All right, our hashtag is still GTAC PEC. You also please make use of that hashtag online. So take us in those amazing photos on the socials that we've seen you taking around. We'll really appreciate that. We are streaming live on YouTube. As you may understand, just go on YouTube and search for GTAC and share the link with your contacts as far as wide. Access on YouTube is free, so we'd like to share this one with everyone. And also you have a chance to see yourself live on YouTube. Name tags, remember these are your VIP passports. Keep it with you for full access and full experience of the conference. Phones, please let them on silent. We love your social media posts, yes, but let's have the ringtones. Let's not have the ringtones to steal the spotlight of why we are here. The bathrooms by now, no treasure hunt needed. Probably we all know where the bathrooms, most of us are. As you exit the room, you turn left. On the far left door, you would see the signs towards the mall. You'll turn the final left and then you'll find your bathroom. Or just ask one of our GTAC officials for directions. Excuse me. So you can also get involved, use your voice, ask questions, join the polls, and participate on our Join app, which is up online, where you can participate here and both. Those that are joining us online, they can use that facility to participate. And finally, be back every time we go for tea breaks and lunch. Make sure you are back here on time so you don't miss a single moment of this conference. So yeah, let's make the most of the day. Your energy and participation is what makes this conference a great success. So we're counting on you. We bank on you. Anything that you do really determines how the conference goes. So we're counting on you. Excuse me. Just a few highlights, what you can expect for the day. So today, We started today by zooming into the demand side of youth employment. Together, we'll explore which sectors have the greatest potential for job creation, what kind of the economy actually creates jobs, and how skills and public policy can drive real demand for young talent that is in this room and beyond. Expect fresh insights from both local and international perspectives. All our experts that are here to guide us and give us those fresh insights and knowledge that we are here to amass. Next, we bridge the gap between research and results. We'll hear about the latest evidence on active labor programs, tax policies, and social support mechanisms. Our task is to move from findings to actions. That's what we need to do today, spotlighting which interventions open doors for youth and which need to evolve to meet the scale of the challenge. And finally, today's session will highlight practical interventions that are moving the needle. From the basic package of support to the Presidential Employment Fund, Harambe is in the house, and the youth employment strategy will also be in discussion. We'll learn from program leaders, debate what's effective, and draw inspiration for what's next. We'll, of course, wrap up with a lively conversation from leading writers and commentators that will be joining us on stage, making sure that every voice is part of the national dialogue and part of the contributions to the challenges that brought us here. So let's build to yesterday's momentum and make day 2 a launch pad for solutions of South Africa's youth. I think most of us are here to find those solutions, so we count on you to make that happen. Right. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we have a first panel that is ready to take us through where will the youth jobs come from, a demand-side view of stimulating youth employment, growth, skills, and public policy. And of course, we'll be tackling the topic, where will the jobs come from? To help us lead that panel discussion is my boss, who's in the room. She goes by the name of Boipuso Modise, the Deputy Director General of the National Treasury's Economic Policy and International Cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Boipuso Modise. Selector, just a bit of sound as the... Welcome. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, in the presentation.
So we're going to call Prof. to do the first presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, I just actually need my mic back.
All right, can we have Boipuso's mic back? Lebo? Okay, they'll give you a mic back. Sure.
Thanks so much. Morning, everyone. Great. It's always a sad and equally scary day when anyone introduces you as their boss. As a public servant, we tend to have a great many of those. My name is Boipuso. I work at the National Treasury, and I currently work in economic policy and international cooperation with VOSE, among other people. There are quite a few of us now, which is a great thing. And one of the many things that we work on and reflect on, as you can all imagine, given the challenges that we face from an economic perspective, is employment, or the lack thereof in the South African economy. And one of the things that we're seized by is understanding some of the structural issues in the South African economy from an employment perspective, why it is that young people in general, aren't able to find jobs, those who are looking, and what it is that we need to be thinking about differently in the South African economy to result in better outcomes in that regard. So this morning we're in for a really, really interesting conversation that takes into consideration and reflects on some of these things and hopefully comes up with some solutions, which is always a great place to be. To do that, we're going to have the conversation in two parts. We're first going to hear from Prof. Justin Fasari and Spelele Ngete, who are going to take us through a presentation until about 9:15. I'll do my best to be a good timekeeper. This is not always my strong suit, but I'll do what I can. After which we will have 3 short presentations from Dr. Josh Badlander, who will be online, Sbusiso Gumbi, who's just walked in, morning Sbu, and Nico Mabunda, who will be joining us on stage, and then we will open up for questions and answers, which I think will make for a very interesting session. So without saying too much more, can I please ask Prof. Fasari and Spare to please come and join me on stage, if that's okay. Thank you. I see you've wisely chosen the very far end from me. I have that effect on people. Okay, fantastic. I'm not sure if you have been guided on how to drive the presentation. Can we get a sense of it's going to drive automatically? So they must just flag you. There's a clicker at the podium, I presume? Is that what you, okay, great. So, all right, I think we figured it out. Thank you very much. Okay, Prof, over to you. Thank you.
Okay. So am I supposed to stand at the podium here or sit down and stand over here? Great. Hopefully I can get this clicker to work. It's a real pleasure to be with everyone. Look, I know economists think of themselves as rock stars, but Treasury seem to take this quite seriously with the music and the lights and the maybe dancing. Actually, we did have dancing. But in all honesty, it's always a real pleasure to be in this room today for us to be thinking seriously about some of South Africa's economic challenges. And I can't think of a more serious or more important or strategic issue than unemployment. I don't know about you. I think it's the #1 issue for the South African economy going forward. And I know today we're going to get a lot of insight and perspective, but I see myself in Sepele's role this morning to really maybe try and ask some harder questions, some provocative questions, to try and set the stage when we do start thinking about the details of answers and solutions. I think we need to make sure that we're seeing this problem from all angles. So, without further ado, great, you should be seeing my slide. Okay. Great, so are we asking the right question when we face this issue of unemployment in South Africa? I was thinking about how to start this presentation today, so I thought I'd put up a few pictures. And I know that many of you here are also students. It's a sort of a capacity building event. So I wonder, can anyone in the audience identify which event in history do these photos represent? Come on, let's get some participation so it's not so boring today. Yes, someone at the back. Thank you. Thank you, yes.
Is this the Great Depression?
It is. This is the Great Depression. Let's put our hands together. Okay. The stock market, Wall Street crashed in 1929. What you might not realize, it lasted more than a decade. Does anyone know what ended it? What was the end of the Great Depression? Come on, hazard a guess. Thank you.
World War II?
I think that's a good answer. There's also another one. See someone put their hand right in the back in the white. Sure, these bright lights are quite something. You sort of look into the haze. Thank you.
Jacques, economic historian from Stellenbosch, so I hope I can get it right. FDR's labor policy reforms in the US.
Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, okay, which was a big infrastructure stimulus. It also had some sort of financial stabilization. It also had some public works that it introduced. So, but yes, actually the economy kind of started and stuttered, and even though those reforms made a difference, it was World War II that ultimately was a huge demand stimulus and really ended it. So the other question is, what did classical economics, because we're sort of an economics group here, so I feel like I'm talking to the club, what did classical economics say should be done about this crisis? What did classical economists think? Biggest economic crisis probably in history. What did classical economics have to say? Yes.
Given that it's classical economists, I'm assuming they said should do nothing.
Precisely, they said we should do nothing. Yeah, I think that deserves a round of applause. Okay, very familiar arguments, actually. A classical economist thought that the wages were just too high. Prices were too high. Give it time, it will adjust. Say's law brings me back to my economics 101, was that supply will create its own demand. So the point of sort of showing this is that the Great Depression actually changed economics, because it meant that classical economics needed to wonder whether they were asking the right questions. And I think in the South African context, this is an important lesson for us. Throughout this conference today, are we asking the right questions in the first place? Or are we throwing at this problem the same old things that seem to be achieving very, very little? I want to say from the outset that I don't have all the answers to South Africa's unemployment problems. I wish I did. I wish there was a silver bullet. But I do think that we need to take this problem very seriously, and I think we can learn some lessons. So here are some graphs from the Great Depression. Interestingly enough, do you know what the unemployment rates were reaching in the developed world at that time? What kind of levels? Well, I think it was sort of getting up to the sort of 25% mark, right? What is South Africa's rate of unemployment? Well, it depends how you measure it. But even if you measure it in a conservative way and leave out the non-searching, it's at this level and beyond, and it's been at that level for a long time. So this was the biggest crisis in the developed world's history, and yet they were facing levels of unemployment similar to us. I think the other thing to say about this is that at the time it was kind of assumed that it was a problem of the individual's characteristics. It was from the supply side that a lot of the focus and attention was being brought to bear. But ultimately, it ushered in an era of economics, Keynesian economics, which actually said it's not just the problem of what's happening on supply, but we also need to understand a problem on the demand side. In other words, there's something wrong with the economy itself, that we actually have all of this labor that's not being put to good use. And in the South African case, we have to also ask the question, where does a lot of the attention and the focus go on unemployment? This is a meta-analysis. It wasn't a meta-analysis, it was a synthesis of all the evidence on unemployment, done a few years back. I think it's by Ariane, colleagues at UCT Seldrew. And they said, in summing up all the evidence that economists were working on this unemployment in South Africa, they said that a key limitation of the synthesis is that it does rely on what research has been done, the extant literature. And in this study, a clear gap in the literature is on demand-side challenges, which require additional research and attention in order to inform policy approaches. In other words, we know a lot about why individuals sometimes struggle to compete and access jobs in the labor market, but we don't often ask the question around why our levels of investment, why we have sort of demand that we do have. And I think we need both sides of the coin. Okay, so the other thing to think very hard about is in what ways does our economics become broken in a context of such mass unemployment? And for those of you studying out there, again, you come across a lot of theories and a lot of thinking around how things should work, but most of those things are assuming that we have a labor market that's working and absorbing all the labor. So, take your standard growth accounting framework. What does economics have to say about how a country can grow in its most basic forms? What are the things that lead to growth? Well, I'm not a macroeconomist, but generally they talk about four things. It's your kind of natural resources or your land, it's your labor, and it's your capital, meaning your stock of stuff, machinery, equipment, etc. What am I missing? Oh, and technology that combines with that. That's your basic growth accounting framework. But clearly, in the South African context, will more labor lead to more output? No, we've got lots of labor, but it's just sitting out there doing nothing. So actually, it's fundamentally broken in terms of the model of growth accounting. The other way in which countries can grow, so that's with just the sort of stock of stuff that you combine to produce more. The other thing that you can use is you can combine them in the most efficient way possible. This is known as allocative efficiency. In other words, resources are moving to their highest use. But once again, in the South African context, it's not just about how we be as efficient as possible. Our biggest inefficiency is that we have all of this unemployment that we're not using in the first place. So once again, it kind of breaks down. Technological progress, total factor productivity, that's the other area of source for us to generate our growth. Of course, innovation can do all of that. But what we worry about at the moment is things like artificial intelligence and the extent to which it would reduce our labor demand. So in all of these things, this kind of puzzle or conundrum of unemployment, I think, is breaking down our conventional approach. So other things that have always been a bedrock of economic development for countries, they talk about a demographic dividend. Can South Africa have a demographic dividend? Well, no, the concept is breaking down because even if we've got a working age population that's growing, that labor is not being utilized. What about urbanization and development? Something that I have a passion for and work on a lot, about cities, etc. Well, the conventional model assumes that you go from farm in rural areas, urbanize into cities, into factories. People's average productivity is a lot higher in the manufacturing sector, and you get development and growth. But once again, in the South African context, do we have the demand and the absorption of labor in our factories, in our cities? It's breaking down. Industrialization-led development, similar thing. Human capital, investing in education, all of these things, I think we need to think carefully around how our conventional economics would think about growth, would think about development, and the way in which unemployment and our mass unemployment is really breaking our models in the first place. Okay, so you probably all know this sort of thing, but it is worth just reiterating the point. Okay, that South Africa's level of unemployment is sort of unprecedented. It's mysterious. If you get international experts to come into South Africa, it's the first thing that they're going to notice is that the level of unemployment is just so much higher. And in fact, as I said, higher than during the developed world's greatest crisis of the Great Depression. So you can see the graph on your left is the G20 countries, and yeah, South Africa's bar looks extraordinary. And if we just show a general map of the world, apart from some of our neighbors in Southern Africa who have the same problem, you can see that South Africa's level of unemployment is unprecedented. Okay, so this is something that's a real problem for us in particular. So what has been happening in the last while? Well, it probably should come as no surprise to you that we've been moving backwards. So one of the pieces of projects that I have the privilege of working on is in a secure facility that National Treasury run, where we mine tax data. And with the tax returns, you can get a really accurate sense of what's happening in the formal economy. And you see that the last 10 years, our formal employment has been growing by less than 1% per year. So that's adding about 130,000 formal jobs. Of course, the problem is that you're actually going backwards because your population is growing. So where in other countries you would be getting this demographic dividend payoff because you're getting more workers, more labor, in the South African case, it's actually just adding to more unemployment. So by account of the quarterly labor force survey, the number of unemployed people has now risen from 8 million to 12 million between 2014 and 2024. So it's really, again, the scale of it is something quite staggering to get your head around. So clearly our economy needs to grow. It needs to grow a lot faster if we're going to start making progress on the unemployment problem. So we need faster growth. But you run the numbers, because I've sat down and had to think about it. What actually would need to happen for this to be true? For faster growth to solve our unemployment problem, what's actually needed? Well, when it comes to the formal economy, which is decent levels of work and kind of what we would sort of aspire to, we've actually reached a point where we need to double the number of formal jobs to absorb our unemployed. Double. So that's a formal economy overnight that needs to be twice the size. Can you see this issue of demand and why it's so relevant and something we really need to think hard about? Okay, so how do we get our economy to that size? Well, compounding growth can do a lot of good over a long period of time, just to say. It can be a really powerful mechanism. So if you take 3% and say that our labor market is going to produce 3% jobs every year for the next 50 years, that's what it would take for the unemployment rate to sort of be making enough inroads to population growth. So this is a bit of a crude back-of-the-envelope kind of calculation, I admit. But once again, it kind of helps massage in this intuition that our problem is really big, and it's really structural. And it's not just related to the characteristics of workers. It relates to the size of the formal sector relative to the labor that we have to supply. So it doesn't add up. If we can grow at 5%, which I don't know if anyone in this room thinks that's realistic. Again, you could grow at 5% but have jobs growth less than that. There's no guarantee that your GDP growth is going to correlate. But let's just say that you can get a GDP growth that absorbs all the labor at the same rate, at 5%. You're now looking at about 20 years. But the challenge is that's a long time to wait for the average South African, even if we can pull that off. So again, we've reached a moment in history, and we've reached a moment where we've got this big gap between what we need from the formal economy versus what it can actually realistically deliver. And that's why this conference is so important. Okay, one more slide from me, and then I'm going to hand over to Siphelele. So one of the things that's also worrying in this mix is that it's not just the scale of the problem, which is pretty staggering, okay, or the pace, but it's who's being left behind. So this is a chart from, again, using the tax data where we can really accurately look at these different demographic groups. And I'm hoping you can see from a distance out there. And you can see in red is the 15 to 25-year-olds, green is the 25 to 35-year-olds, and yellow is the 35-year-old plus. And if we benchmark the high point in our employment, pre-COVID crisis, so in January, February 2020, we can then see how did that total number of jobs change in the about 5 to 6 years after the COVID pandemic, which we've got data for at this point. And what's really remarkable is actually how little impact there was for the older age cohort. Yes, there was a slight dip in employment numbers, but actually things went pretty well for them. And very soon, still within the lockdown periods, you can see that our 35-year-old and above cohort was able to both recover from the pre-pandemic level and exceed it. But notice what's happened for our younger age cohorts in green and in red. And in fact, both of these younger age cohorts, at the last count of the tax data, which is, we would like to update this, I think in about September, October, when we get the new data in. But what you can see is that they still had not recovered from the COVID pandemic crisis. So not only is unemployment a problem, but particularly among the youth. And maybe that's not a surprise. We do know these are remarkable rates that get quoted. But I think, again, it's worth me massaging in this point that a lot of younger workers face very poor prospects. Okay. Over to you, Siphelele. Do you want to come and take the podium?
Greetings. So, what are the consequences of youth unemployment? We first have to begin with noting that beyond the stats are human beings. It's young people with dreams, with families, and with society that expects something for them. So we all know these figures, right? From age group of 15 to 24, 60% are unemployed. From the age group of 15 to 24, about 37% are not in employment, education, or training. But why is this important? Why is the focus on youth unemployment important when we have broader unemployment, when we have chronic poverty, chronic inequality? And the importance of this statistic is the ripple effects of youth unemployment. How economic activity or exclusion during this particular period of an individual's life can shape how they accumulate wealth, how do they build families, and their labor market activity throughout their adulthood up into retirement age. Now, as you can see, at the starting point, right, of which, if you know South Africa, is unequal, right? Largely shaped by intergenerational inequality, household socioeconomic status, and etc., right? So, at the starting point, we all enter 15. Some are dropped off, right? They are not in education or training or any form of employment due to many reasons, many being socioeconomic, right? And these individuals who then become excluded to maybe unemployment or some form of precarious employment, this tends to become a trend. As studies have found that individuals during this period, right, who do not have sort of positive labor market outcomes or positive labor market activity end up having a trend of precarious work or chronic unemployment throughout their lifetime, right? So this then creates inequality. Now, during the times of apartheid, this was intentionally done by the apartheid government, right? Through policies such as Bantu education and others to ensure that black people are always starting from behind and always a constant supply of cheap labor. Now, in the current times, though the intentional policies are no longer there, however, the current situations we face, such as deindustrialization, such as low growth, such as automation, etc., interact with sort of this long-standing inequality in South Africa and continues to expand the inequality pool and continues to lead to more exclusion, particularly to young, black, and low-skilled youth. And this exclusion, if it's left unchanged, if left unintervened, results in the continuation of poverty and the continuation of inequality. Because though youth unemployment itself is a product of poverty and inequality, and we deem it a solution, when itself is left unchecked, it reproduces this inequality. So when we have a large portion of young people excluded from the economy, excluded from decent work, we literally living inequality. That's not just going to affect these individuals, but the households they build, and which will result in them, we were always taught about the economic freedom, to youth that were living under the so-called wasted years, whose youth took place in a stage of crisis. Their dreams became delayed, and their pursuit of economic freedom and their dreams became delayed. And thus, they drop them off now to their kids with the hope that they will achieve economic mobility through their kids. So, if left unaddressed, now, the challenges that we currently face now that are interacting with our context of chronic inequality and chronic poverty are challenges that are faced by other countries throughout the world, right? If we talk about deindustrialization, other countries are experiencing it. If we're talking about skills inflation, if we're talking about underemployment, other countries are experiencing this. However, its context of South Africa is what makes the difference, right? As you know, we can all be given the same seed, but what grows, or the health of the tree that grows, depends on the soil, right? So countries with better soil or better context or better environment, the negative effects of automation and other effects can be easily buffered, or they can easily recover from them, right? However, in our context, these factors, these negative factors, they come in and interact with an environment that is heavily affected by chronic poverty, heavily affected by chronic inequality, heavily affected by youth unemployment. And instead, they result in a much greater negative effect, right? And this can be seen even with simple things, as the protests we see now. Migration happens everywhere. What is the issue with South Africa that makes it this issue? It is context, and the multiple contexts that exist within our country, right? It is this soil in which they are coming in, and in this soil, it's where inequality becomes further expanded. Now, the first of these, now in a period where there is low growth and low sort of job creation, two mismatches also occur. Usually we focus on one mismatch, which is sort of the skills shortage, right? That's the one we focus on. But also we have a mismatch of underemployment, where individuals with higher qualification take jobs that are precarious or that require lower qualification in order to survive, right? Because there are not sufficient amount of jobs. They take whatever job is available, elementary occupation, etc., etc. Now, in a usual circumstances, them taking these form of jobs acts as a stepping stone, because it's better to participate than not participate at all. However, in the situation of South Africa, where the economy itself is not providing enough decent jobs, this entry to this form of employment becomes chronic. And even though it's precarious work and etc. is far better than being unemployed, but it itself has a negative effect on these individuals' well-being and on these individuals' households, right? So there is a substantial rise in underemployment, and this underemployment results to become chronic because we are not producing sufficient jobs. Another form of skills mismatch that we find is a skills inflation. Now, this skills inflation arises when a job that previously required matric, all of a sudden now requires a degree. A perfect example of this is what we have been seeing with Metro Police and General and SAPS, right? This, previously when we were growing up, individuals who couldn't afford to go to higher education for numerous reasons, being affordability, being marks, and etc., would always rely on SAPS They was like, no, I will just become a police officer and then I will study law when I'm a police officer. Because that pathway always provided stable income and also a stable pathway of being a middle class and living a noble life. Get a GTI, you live a noble life. However, what we are seeing now, because of this mass unemployment, we're hearing police officials saying that we will prefer individuals with diploma. We'll prefer individuals with degrees. We're seeing individuals with master's degrees becoming police officers. So what this issue is causing is that individuals who have low-skilled or who couldn't even afford to go to higher education are being crowded out in this particular pathway. And it's not this pathway alone. We are seeing this with call center agents. We are seeing this with clerk jobs, etc., etc. Now, it will say, it's good, better skilled people, but the salary is not increasing. It's not matching up, right? So this, both underemployment and the skills inflation is resulting in the crowding out of individuals who are low-skilled. And this crowding out then reproduces inequality, as we know that education levels in South Africa are very dependent on socio-economic status of a child's household and etc., etc. So this crowding out effect leads to a cycle of inequality, of reproduction of inequality. Now, these are the jobs, according to the latest QLFS survey. So 3 occupations were regarded as or had the highest percentage or contributed to the highest portion of individuals being of youth employment. It was elementary occupations, services, and clerks, right? Now, if you see elementary occupation, you can see about 49% of elementary occupation occupied by youth is informal, right? This doesn't mean that it consists in the informal sector. It means that it is a job without protection. It can be in the informal and the formal. It just lacks protection, right? So 49% of young people in elementary jobs are informally employed. Clerks, also a traditional stable one, about 20% are in informal jobs, right? And this tells the story of how young people are pursuing work, but the decency of this particular work is also an issue because we don't just have an issue of unemployment alone. We also have an issue of lack of decent work, right? Which traps people and which blocks the upward mobility that was expected from these individuals to achieve. Now, I've already spoken about this. Now, another skills mismatch that is caused by the shift in our economy, right? So currently, our economy or the dominant sectors that contribute to employment are service sectors, right? Our economy has become service-orientated, right? There is a decline in industrial, in secondary and primary industries, right? There's been this substantial decline in these industries. And because these industries, they are, in terms of the profile, the skills profile of those who they employ is substantially different, it causes sort of this skills mismatch, right? So, manufacturing. Traditionally, manufacturing was able to provide stable employment for individuals without matric, right? Manufacturing was also situated in areas that are outside the metros, right? Some of our townships we come from were literally built to become a form of labor provisions for these particular manufacturing industries. However, the decline of these manufacturing industries causes, firstly, a skills mismatch in that the skills required by the service industries, such as your business, etc. For example, if you look at the percentage with those, they require people with matric and above, right? With a large portion of them being having some form of tertiary education, right? So this then, if you are an individual who was let go in a manufacturing plant, it's difficult for you to transition easily to the service sector because of this skills mismatch in terms of what is demanded and from the increasing field, and that is demanded from the declining skills. There's also a spatial mismatch. As I previously stated, right? Manufacturing and these other industries, secondary industries, were able to distribute economic activity in places such as Kwakwa, non-metropolitan places, right? And so when these activities decline or these factories shut down, they cause an issue because now opportunities in these areas decline and causing a huge migration, meaning that individuals, young people in these areas have to travel to your PE, have to travel to your Durban to find employment. Now, again, this is not something we're experiencing alone as South Africa. Other countries are also experiencing deindustrialization. However, with them, their labor pool is much more educated, and also there's more investment in infrastructure. So these municipalities or those areas in those countries are able to attract other industries to come in the area, right? Because they do have the infrastructure, they do have the thing. Now, this is another issue that affects South Africa, is that if a manufacturing plant closed down in Mthatha, it's going to be difficult due to the service delivery issues to attract another investor to build this. This causes a huge issue, right? And a huge cost of which I'm going to discuss in terms of young people having to travel for work opportunities, right? And also, this mismatch is also further caused by your automation, right? And digitalization and green transitions. We always say there will be green jobs, but these green jobs, if you look at their skills profile, it's still jobs that requires degree, etc., right? It's not matching up with the skills profile of those being let go, right? Now, another one. Unemployment in South Africa is not random. It has a race, it has a gender, right? So if you look at these statistics, this is youth unemployment by race. As you can see there, the highest graduate unemployment is among Black Africans, right? It's among Black Africans. It has the highest, which is above the average graduate unemployment in South Africa. Now, if you look at matric unemployment for whites, it's actually lower than graduate unemployment among blacks. Meaning, whites with matric are still better off or more likely to be employed than black graduates. This tells us that even though with education expansion, employment, right, or activity in the labor market depends on other factors also, such as social capital, right? I'm from Durban. We used to speak about something called networks or connection, which means who do you know? And when I say who do you know who has access to certain rooms in which if they were to mention your name, that will give you some form of economic mobility or some economic benefit, right? So obviously, if you are unemployed in Stellenbosch and your uncle is maybe a CEO, let's say, of Eskom, you are different than an unemployed engineer in Kwakwa whose uncle is a taxi operator and maybe a branch member of the ANC. It's different, right? Because that doesn't carry the same social capital. And so those are other factors, such as household wealth and etc. Because looking for unemployment looking for a job, it's not just looking for a job. It's a costly activity, right? There was a minister who said, young people are just not looking enough. It's not the case. It's a very costly activity. First is the financial costs, right? First is the financial cost. So this is why, firstly, you find that people be like, we give you 350. 350 itself is not enough to subsidize individuals to find jobs, even though it was never meant for that, right? Because there is financial implications, right? You need to have data. You need to have money to travel. You need to have a lot of things, right? Relocation costs, especially if you are in an impoverished area and economic activity is only happening in the urban area. So you need to travel, right? And obviously those who come from non-wealthy household will struggle with this, right? This puts them in a disadvantage. Another one is time costs, right? It is a time-consuming activity, right? So you need to be able to, firstly, the time to travel, you need to be able to look for these jobs. Now, consider a job seeker who is a mother, who is a caregiver in their household. This already puts them in a disadvantage, right? Also, safety implications, right? As you know, South African criminals love a good crisis. And the unemployment crisis creates an opportunity for them to exploit our people, right? As we know, we're all aware of your job recruiting scams. We're all aware of your pay for a job. You know, you have to pay a particular bribe in order to get a job. We're all aware of people who went for job interviews and got kidnapped, right? And again, the most targets of these are particularly women, and more specifically, black women, because, you know, they are the most vulnerable, right? Most desperate. So these criminals always target them, right? And those are the safety costs of looking for a job. And also a well-being cost. As already stated, beyond these statistics are individuals with aspirations, with dreams. And this thing of constantly receiving, we regret to inform you, does affect your health. And so we have a lot of people, they become isolated. They become what? Because there's a mental well-being cost associated with non-economic activity, right? And this cost is not just borne by the person alone. It's borne by the family and the society as a whole, right? Because that's why we always say that if this situation continues, we might have a ticking time bomb in our hands, as this will not just lead to the decline of the mental health of these individuals, but also the social well-being of our society. Thank you.
Can see in big yellow that we're kind of out of time, so I've got the hard job of trying to sort of wrap this up in the last few minutes. But I think it's important context to set in terms of the size of the crisis, the consequences of the crisis is something that we can't ignore. So what are our options? And I think that a lot of these we're going to go into more detail in the rest of this conference. But it's probably worth just mentioning a few things. I'm going to sidestep this issue about immigration because we've run out of time. But just to say, look at South African polling or public polling in South Africa asking whether immigrants take away jobs from people born in the country. More than any other country in the world, South Africans responded positively to this question. Great. So clearly there's a lot of pressure. If you don't have a job, don't have a livelihood, these can be the outcomes of the sort of politics of scarcity. There can also be a politics of scarcity around simple answers today. One of those is around wage flexibility, right? Surely you just drop the wage, problem solved overnight. Really interesting that when the robust empirical work has been done on this for South Africa, it actually finds very little responsiveness from the market. In other words, it's probably highly inelastic. So you can drop wages, but you're not going to get a very big impact in terms of the extra numbers, both from the employment tax incentive side and from the minimum wages side. Both of those literatures suggest that it's not as simple as just dropping wages because demand is really inelastic. So in terms of different ways of thinking about this problem, option one, and we've touched on this, we clearly need the formal economy to grow faster, right? We really need this growth, investment, infrastructure, export competitiveness. But one of the points we're making today is that this is necessary, but it's probably not sufficient, at least not for the next generation or two or three, depending on how pessimistic you are about our growth scenarios. Another option is around the role of the informal economy. and I know that Professor Haroon Barat spoke to you yesterday and you had some debates around this. Again, we can't romanticize it, but I think really important avenue in South Africa. We have quite a low number of informal jobs compared to some of our other comparators, and that goes quite a long way of explaining our high unemployment. So we need a much more progressive attitude towards informality. I started off talking about the Great Depression. One of the things that happened at that time was some form of public employment guarantee. And talking about our expanded public works program and other sorts of approaches, I think is really important for us to consider. Can government be an employer of last resort? Clearly, we need a lot more infrastructure in this country, built in terms of roads, rails, bridges, etc. And we've got this labor that's just surplus, going to waste. I think we can think more carefully about that. And last but not least, we often hear it debated around some form of basic income support. In some ways, this is just an admission to say, well, we actually need a social safety net to play a role. And clearly, a social safety net can actually stimulate demand. It can not only provide a protection, but it can help give people a starting point to invest and get sort of activities going. I think the key question with this one is, can we afford it, right? So, making some final remarks, I must confess that as an economist thinking about this problem over the last while, I am motivated by a moral argument. And I hope we all take this seriously in the room today, which is, if you were the average South African, right, what would you want? So I'm born as a white, privileged South African in a particular time and place. But what happens if I didn't know where I was going to be born? What happens if it was just a roll of the dice and I might be born anywhere in South African society? What would I want, right? And I think that we need to make some tough choices today about what we think is most important and what we think should be prioritized. Rather than asking, how do we help young people find jobs, which is an important question, we also need to be thinking about what kind of economy creates jobs at the scale that we need. We do require some kind of big-scale push or state-led intervention, I think. Business as usual really looks bleak, even in the best-case scenarios. So what's that going to be? How do we prioritize that, and what do we do? Ultimately, I think it's time that we take a few more strategic bets. But it would help if we had some experimentation, right? To know which of those bets would be better placed to really do something in reality. Sometimes in South Africa, we're all or nothing with our policy. It would be great for us to experiment a lot more. Okay, thanks so much. Really appreciate the time to speak to you today.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Pelele. Very, very interesting. Excellent context to set the scene for the conversation to have. I think a very helpful place that you ended talking about sort of these 4 options that we could be considering. I have some suspicions on where we end up in relation to all 4, and I think the answer is a little bit of everything. But the question is how you get that balance right. So thank you once again. I think for me, 2 key things have come to the fore. And whilst I go through those 2 key things, can I please ask our following presenters for the next component of the morning to please come up? I know Dr. Budlander will be joining us online. But Niego and Michael, could you please come and join us on stage as we transition to the second part of the conversation? Sorry, Sbu as well. Please come up. Exactly right. 2 key things for me came up from the first part of the conversation. The first is growth is a necessary but insufficient condition for full employment. And I think that's necessary and important. The second is that context matters. Context matters for employment for individuals, to your very helpful points, Pelele, but also, and I think the analogy you gave is such a good one, the quality of the soil in which you plant the tree matters significantly. And I think a big part of the work that we do and what we're very much preoccupied with is how you change the quality of that soil, because it's critically important for the outcomes that we get from an employment perspective. So with those two reflections, and thanks again for those very, very helpful opening remarks and contextual points, can I then ask for us to move into the second session of our presentation, the second session of our morning? We will have shorter presentations from Josh, then Nico, then we can have some reflections from Michael. I know we've also got a colleague in the audience from the HSRC who has some reflections as well. And then we move to Q&A. So if we can keep it tidy, we'll have a good amount of time for a Q&A. So my plea to all of us is to work together to get that right. Thanks so much. So over to you, Josh. Thank you so much for...
And thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity to present. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I'm glad to at least have this opportunity. I'm Josh Balland. I'm an academic economist at SALDRU at the University of Cape Town, and I work really in labor economics, and one of those areas is about public employment programs, which I'll talk to you about now. But I also work on unemployment more generally, and I'm very looking forward to the discussion. Right, and what I'm talking to you about is kind of the multiply and productivity aspects of public employment programs, and specifically what we can learn from the education sector. And to give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about, really what that means is the Basic Education Employment Initiative. And I'm going to start by telling you what that is. I think most people know, but maybe people don't know the full scale of it. And then I'm going to talk about some of my own work, which is trying to, with Ihsan Basir, which is trying to kind of trace out some of the potential stimulus effects, the first part of the stimulus effects of the Basic Education Employment Initiative. I want to explain what that means. And then I'm going to talk about some work from Kelly Ardington about how the programs like this can improve educational outcomes for students. And then lastly, some lessons from the Binding Constraints Lab on some key lessons from the rollout of the Basic Education Employment Initiative. But just to start with the BEI, what is it? Because I think people have heard of it, and maybe people do know something about it, but might not appreciate its scale and some of its details. So from 2020 to 2025, the BEI was the largest youth employment program in South Africa. And this graph gives you some idea. This is over 5 phases of the program, but it employed hundreds of thousands of people across the country. What were they doing? Well, these people were employed as what are either called education assistants or general support assistants in schools. And these are young people below the age of 35, typically, though there were some exceptions in different phases, who from those school areas, they applied, and then if they were selected, they got paid. Initially, it was the national minimum wage. Now it's around 4,000 Rand a month, up to 40 hours a week, basically to assist schools. And that could mean if you're an education assistant, it could be things like helping kids with reading or learning IT stuff. Or if you're a general support assistant, it could be something like being a handy person or something like that. And basically, you often have, say, 10 teaching assistants. I mean, that's not everybody likes that language. I'm just going to use teaching assistants to refer to education assistants plus general support assistants. And you would have maybe 10 or 20 of these young people assisting teachers, assisting schools per school. And what that means is that this program has a huge footprint because schools in South Africa are distributed across the country, including in the poorest areas of the country. So you had this local employment and this teaching assistance, whatever that was, spread widely across the country. It's a massive intervention which took advantage of the fact that when it comes to public employment, infrastructure is a really core constraint. But with schools, you already had the infrastructure because schools exist and schools have management processes and schools have teachers, that kind of stuff. All right. Like I said, there were 5 phases of the BEI. It started in December 2020 as a kind of emergency COVID response. And then it basically had a version of it every year, except you'll see for 2024, which we'll come back to at the end when there were administrative issues. But it's employed, between 320,000 to 200,000 young people in each phase, which obviously is really, really massive. So it's a big intervention. But one of the things that's really stark about the BEI is I've been involved in evaluating it a little bit here and there. And the BEI, just being involved in watching it and a little bit of evaluation, it also illustrates this. It's a big program, but it also illustrates the scale of the problem. So in this last phase, the 2025 phase, though there were only 200,000 opportunities available, 1.65 million people applied for those 200,000 jobs. So that really shows you the scale of our issue, that you have so many people applying for these jobs when there just aren't enough jobs to go around. Okay. All right, so that's the BEI implemented by the Department of Basic Education and a kind of key cornerstone of the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program. This now I want to talk very briefly about a paper that I did with my colleague Ihsan Basir. It's called Stimulus Effects of a Large Employment Program. And a spoiler alert, that large employment program is the BEI. And really what we were trying to see here is how do wages from people being employed in the BEI circulate throughout the economy? Because the idea is that when somebody gets a job, especially say it's public money, somebody gets a job or a grant, it's not just the case that money goes to them and then it stops, right? That money goes somewhere. And what we're interested in seeing is, does that money support other economic activity from other people? Now, I'm not a macroeconomist, and there are some macroeconomists or public economists on this panel, so people can, talk to me a little bit about this in the discussion. But I think just to give some people an idea of what we're talking about whether spending encourages economic activity, is to think about what economists call the multiplier. And really, the idea is that if somebody gets 100 Rand, what's going to happen with it? So the first point is that there are kind of two places that that money can go. If I get 100 Rand, just as an illustrative example for a job, I can either save that money, right? In which case it kind of gets removed out of the spending system I'm going to talk about. And so people regard that as a leakage, but savings are still important, not just for the individual, but for the economy as a whole, because savings can finance investment under some circumstances. But the point is that what we're really interested in here is that when people get this money, they're going to spend some of it, right? And they may spend it, for example, on informal traders or at big chain stores. And then what that spending now becomes income to the store, right? And what we're really interested in here is what the store does with that money. That determines whether the spending is going to be about expanding economic activity or not. Because if the store basically says, okay, I've got increased demand for my goods now, because there are all these teaching assistants in my area, and the store just decides to increase prices and therefore absorb this fully in profits, that doesn't really expand economic activity, right? But what we can see from a whole lot of data is that often when stores and businesses in general get increased demand, they expand to take advantage of that increased demand, right? They want to sell more goods. And what that typically means is that they're going to hire more people, because you need more people to sell more goods, whether that's in a retail store, that's cashiers, or whether that's in a manufacturing firm and you need to actually more people to make more goods. And alongside expanding employment, typically also goes expanding wages, because you want to retain your workforce or you want to encourage more people to apply for the job. So this is kind of the key multiplier mechanism, that as demand expands, some part of that is going to be used to expand local employment and wages. And that means that when this teaching assistant got that job, it's not just them who gets a job, but potentially other people as well in the private side of the economy. And this process then recirculates, because if the retail store now needed to sell more bread, they go to the flour mill and they buy more flour. And then the flour mill, maybe they need to also expand employment. Maybe the flour mill now needs more wheat, and so they go to the farmer, and maybe the farmer needs to expand more employment. And at each point of this stage, those employees are also buying more goods. And so the idea is that you can have this kind of virtuous cycle where you can kickstart some economic activity, and it has benefits beyond just the individual who received that job. There are leakages along the way, right? So some goods we import. I mean, that's not going to expand local production. And what we were interested in here is seeing what kinds of stuff do teaching assistants spend on, and what can we expect in terms of the multiplier effects of this spending. So the way that this happened is that we had this amazing data partnership. Yesterday I spoke a lot about data partnerships between government, was the DBE and the presidency, and an NGO, the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, which people will know here, a private sector partner, which is called Omniscient, which is a data platform, and then also one of the largest retailers in South Africa. And really what happened here is that there was this Omniscient has that technology which allows you to kind of match anonymously and securely without sharing data, ID numbers in different systems. They convert them to an anonymized ID, so you don't see the ID number, the IDs stay on site, but you can match data sets across different groups. And what happened basically is that the DBE and Harambee, they have the ID numbers of people who are teaching assistants, right? And people who applied to be teaching assistants but didn't get the jobs. And this big retailer, they've got all the spending data about who spends in their store, because when you get a little loyalty rewards kind of program from a store, that's got your ID number on it, and then they see what you're spending on. And with Omniscient, we developed this way where you could basically ping this big retailer database and say, we see spending from person X. Is person X a teaching assistant? Or is person X somebody who applied to be a teaching assistant but wasn't included? And that's a control group. And the retailer never sees that. Only the researchers see that. And we don't see the ID number or anything like that. We just get an indicator, 0101. These people are teaching assistants and these people aren't. And what that meant is using this data is we could see that when somebody becomes a teaching assistant, so this bit over here is before, and this is when they become a teaching assistant, their spending substantially increases compared to people who applied but never became teaching assistants. This is about a 15% increase in spending at this one particular firm. And we can see what kinds of goods they buy, whether it's groceries, toiletries. I don't have it here, but there's a hardware store, a hardware section in this particular store, that kind of stuff. So we can see the spending, which is the first part of this program, and we can start seeing how this employment, this management employment recirculates through the economy. Now, to then guesstimate and say what the multiplier effect is requires a lot of extra assumptions. We're just going to be not really going to go into that here, but we kind of estimate that it creates around about 100 extra jobs per month, let's say 10,000 Rand a month, just at that retailer. That retailer is then also got its whole demand, its whole supply system, and that means that you've got incomes going to local firms. 70% of the spending goes to local firms in the terms of local incomes in the form of either higher labor income or capital income of local firms. Some of it does go outside the country, and that we can extrapolate this and we can get a little bit further to 1,800 jobs per month if we expand our estimates. This is all very approximate here, and in fact, it's all massive underestimates, which we can talk about if we want to in the Q&A. But the point that we want to make is that with a good enough data, you can see, even though they're big underestimates with this data, you can see some of the spending recirculating through the economy. And the point here is that jobs and incomes do have positive spillover effects. When the public employment program is a job for the individual, but it's also about kickstarting economic activity. Of course, if it's financed from taxes, you have to then think about, well, am I reducing economic activity in another area? But Justin briefly spoke about Keynesian economics. There's a whole literature which suggests if you redistribute from high-income people to low-income people, it can have a bit more of a stimulating kind of effect. But Michael can talk a little bit more about that in his agreements and disagreements. But what's important about the public employment program is that it's not just money that somebody receives; they're actually doing a job. Right now, do these teaching assistants actually increase outcomes in schools? We don't have really clear evaluations yet for the BEI, right, which is this massive program. But we do have evidence from a very similar program, small scale. Not completely similar, but a similar program implemented by Funda Wanda with the DBE in Limpopo, where we have really high quality evidence. And what they did is there were 120 schools, quintile 1 to 3 schools in Limpopo, looking at grade R, 1, 2, 3. And Funda Wanda does these teaching materials like workbooks, and randomly they said, these schools are not going to get any intervention. These schools are going to get these learning materials, and this third group of schools are going to get learning materials and teaching assistants. And what does this do for educational outcomes? And what you see, this is for grade 2s, is that there are substantial increases. So you do get some increases from LTSM, stands for these learning tools like workbooks and stuff, and LTSM plus TA is you get the workbook plus you get a teaching assistant. And you see there are substantial increases compared to the no intervention schools when it comes to the people who got these teaching assistants. The learning materials help a bit, but teaching assistants substantially increase reading outcomes and early grade maths outcomes for these schools. And so now this is not the BEI, right? This is a small program, very bespoke. They put a lot of effort into gathering individual teaching assistants and vetting them and stuff. And the BEI is a mass program. So the results are not going to exactly go through. And we need evidence of that. But what you see is that there is this big effect on outcomes in a similar kind of program for schools. So this is productive employment, potentially, we hope, in the BEI as well. Okay, the last thing is I'm just going to talk about what are some of the lessons for scale that we got from the BEI. And this draws from Binding Constraints Lab, which was who did a partnership with DBE. This is me outside my wheelhouse. So I'm going to be a bit quicker here. This is the kind of qualitative stuff that I know a little about, but lessons. What are the lessons regarding scale from the BEI? The first point is that the BEI happened because there was this emergency when it came to COVID, and people didn't say, we're now going to take 10 years to design a program. They said, this is an opportunity. We've got the infrastructure. We know schools are struggling. We know young people don't have work. We're going to push for this. And people took risks. And then they learned as they went. So the one big lesson is to seize the opportunity and iterate. They brought in more people from outside government, NGOs and stuff, like it's particularly Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, because there are financial constraints on government side. And the DBE redeployed people within government to get the program working. They had a whole long, there's lots in the report here, which I won't talk about. I'm not an expert on, about how to decide what to centralize versus what to delegate to provinces. My reading here about this recommendation to build strong data systems is that for achieving scale, that's really important. And I think that's a lesson that they learned, is that the data systems weren't always so strong and they were kind of doing it as they were going, and that created hardships. But when they did get the systems working, they really meant scale was much more possible. And this are kind of the last 2 points I just want to talk about. The BEI, because it's a thing of kind of you starting small and then just taking opportunity and then iterating, is it still is basically an emergency intervention. So every year there's a question, is it going to be renewed, right? Where's the funding going to come from? And that means nobody can really plan around implementing. People get paid late. People don't know when they're going to start. You can't plan the program properly. And this is why in 2024, there was no BEI, because there were really difficult administrative issues around its funding. That's a huge problem. If we've got something which works, and if government's going to do it anyway, because it is happening every year, though it hasn't happened this year so far, then it needs to be done on a kind of more predictable basis and actually built into budget so people can plan. Money is going to be spent, it seems, so why not do it with some planning and then allow better outcomes? Similarly, there's very little information right now on its impact, right? That's why I was talking about this other education program, to try and get some idea. And part of the reason there hasn't been an impact is because of monitoring and evaluation budgets. But the other reason, which is close to my heart because I'm evaluating this program, is when everything happens at the last minute, because it's not planned, you can't really design a proper evaluation. All right, so just to end, the BEI is the largest youth employment program in SA. It's a cornerstone of the presidential employment stimulus. We can see that incomes from public employment can benefit downstream industries and workers. We can see that teaching assistants can, in another program, substantially improve educational outcomes, and there are lessons to be learned from rolling out the BEI at scale, which I think particularly are around institutionalizing the program rather than just an ad hoc emergency extension every year, and also about doing some more evaluations. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Very helpful. I will keep this sort of rolling, so we've got enough time for Q&A. So I will hand over to you, Smooth, through your reflections. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Is there a clicker? Is it okay if I stand at the podium? My security blanket.
Not your security detail.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the flu.
I've worked with them.
And flu is a real thing, no matter what anyone says. I'm going to be talking a little bit about international examples. And before I go into the presentation, which I'll keep very short, I do want to say I represent my co-authors today, Prof. Annette Bergman, and our now former colleague, Meg Breyer, not Bryant, that's not her name. And really what we wanted to do is to talk about what we know and what we don't know. And I'm really happy to be presenting on the second day today because I don't have to speak to this, and for a lot of people in the room, this is their lived experience. So I won't go into this, as tempting as it is for an economist to do. What we were interested in this paper is trying to see where we could find some areas of overlap, some areas of synergies with countries that have tackled this before. One of the things I do have to say at the onset is that we are a very unique country, both in very positive ways and in very negative ways. Our starting points, our soil, as our colleague spoke to earlier, is a lot different than these countries. The other thing I want to say as a caveat is that we are not country experts. There was an economic historian in the room earlier. We do not purport to be that. But what we are trying to do is to tease out this idea of what can be learned, what kind of environments, what kind of soil produces the results that we're looking for as a country, even though we are starting from very different starting points. So what does labor market evidence already show? These are all leading questions. what is the lived experience from other countries that could be relevant for our specific context? What trade-offs are required for sustainably reducing unemployment? So there are two things that we were particularly interested in, not just in being able to lower unemployment to sort of this low single digits, but to be able to keep this pace up over several decades. And we sort of thrashed it around and we came across sort of 6 country examples that we thought were quite interesting. And the purpose of my presentation today, and it's something that was raised earlier as well, is to try and stimulate and to try and formulate what are the right questions that we should be asking. The paper is available on the SA Tide website for anyone who's interested. It's a very nice, exciting 60+ pages. I promise you, you'll find it very riveting. It's not like anything else is going on in the world at the moment. So here's the conclusion at the beginning. Countries that have been successful in this, they tend to have highly productive service sectors that are highly labor absorptive, that grow strongly, and more increasingly have relied on digital infrastructure to help with that. There's a big investment in skills development to capitalize on these identified growth sectors' growth potential. Successful countries tend to support self-employment and informal work. This point was raised yesterday, and I'm very glad when some of the things that I've come across and that I put in my presentations are also commented on by smart people. It's very reassuring. How they've been able to boost self-employment and informal sector work in general is to not have regulatory barriers. That seems intuitive, but we'll speak to maybe some of the examples in a bit more detail. There is a very deliberate attempt to target the financial aid in this endeavor. So it's not necessarily wide sweeping areas of aid, it's very targeted, it's very deliberate. There is a drive in a lot of these successful countries to talk about not just implementing ALMPs, but really thinking about the design of them and tinkering with them where the outcomes are not what you want. Successful countries tend to balance their approach to wage determination. We use this term very deliberately because it is about balance. It's about some flexibility, but it's also not about sacrificing worker protections. There is a trade-off, and that there will be a slide on trade-offs later in the presentation, but this idea that you have to give up something to get something, that tends to come through a lot in successful countries. In this case, wage concessions are traded for employment security, and this really helps to stabilize employment over the longer term. There aren't these big swings in employment and unemployment. There's some intangible that we haven't quite gotten to naming or labeling, but there is some sort of solidarity that we find in a lot of these countries between the employers and employees that does speak to the subject matter for an entire new paper. So if anyone's interested in that work, we'll be happy to talk. Finally, this idea that there is an enabling environment, the soil, and what we found specifically in our case studies was around transport, so linking workers to opportunities, housing policies, as well as training that enables people to take up different kinds of opportunities, so not sector-specific. One of the important things that is done, and this will come up in the country examples as well a lot, is around this idea that where something is not working, there is enough impetus, there's enough agility to interrogate that and to try and tweak things to maximize impacts where they are working and maybe to scale down some things that aren't working. So we had, 180 odd countries to look through. We really tried to get some sort of objective measure of including which countries we would want. We've settled on these countries. These are by no means at all the gold standards, but we found that in the high-income country case, Germany, Finland, and Russia, we saw a steady decline in unemployment rates, and there weren't any sort of big swings in terms of interim surges of unemployment. We found that interesting, and we wanted to delve a bit deeper into that. On the upper middle income countries, the more developing countries, we found some good examples in China, Indonesia, and Mexico as well, who were able to maintain low unemployment rates for prolonged periods, and we wanted to dig a little deeper into this. So let's start with the first country example that we had, and I'm going to skim through these. These will be shared with everyone else, so we don't need to go into the nitty-gritty necessarily. But one of the things that Germany is cited for a lot is these Hartz reforms that they decided on in the mid-2000s, when many people in this room were obviously studying economics. No, none of you were born. The central idea was this idea to improve the employment services that were already enacted and to try and activate the unemployed to find unemployment. So again, in terms of starting points, this is a different starting point from where we find ourselves in South Africa. But there is nonetheless some lessons that could be drawn from this idea of increasing the flexibility of the labor market and how it worked. What they did was a broad, sweeping suite of reforms that were enacted over many years. But really what they focused on was trying to rejig long-term unemployment assistance, introducing a sort of a flat rate benefit, shifting resources more towards startup subsidies to incentivize self-employment, decentralizing wage bargaining to take into account the sector-specific and in many cases the firm-specific circumstances of the employers, introducing and enhancing short-time work schemes and incentivizing job seeking in a big way, which again is maybe less of a problem in South Africa, but be that as it may, these are important examples of trying to do something different, which is what I think is the main point here. Very quickly to talk about this short-time work scheme that I will not pronounce, no matter how much money you'll give me, but really there were two seminal events where the Kurzarbeit was really tested, and it came through to really show that it was quite resilient in these times of crisis. The first being the global financial crisis beginning at the end of 2008, and then in the COVID-19 crisis, where Germany was one of the few countries within high-income countries and within the EU to prevent mass layoffs. And this idea that they were able to prevent that was really a set of policy instruments that allowed firms to use the instruments at their disposal. So it was actually an intervention to have less intervention, is how we've tried to think about it. So firms could really at short notice, at low cost, implement the short-time work scheme, reduce the number of hours worked by employees. German government comes in to subsidize the payrolls of the affected employees. We do have a similar instrument in South Africa, but I think one of the things that stand out in the German case is the ease with which firms are able to tap that, and they're able to do that quite quickly. And the government comes in within the span of a few months to subsidize the pay once this program is enacted. Program and design and evaluation, again, a very key role. One of the things that they were able to do through this reform process was to be very deliberate and very iterative in the implementation. They were very deliberate in their systematic evaluations of the interventions, and they were able to phase out a lot of the less effective interventions quite quickly. And that's something that I think a lot of economies can draw from. Next, looking to Finland. No jokes on finishing here. I will restrain myself. But essentially what happened with Finland is that they had a massive recession in the 1990s. They saw youth unemployment rates at nearly 34% in 1994, which was massive for them. And as we've seen in earlier presentations, doesn't really faze us too much. Positively, one of the things that happened was that post the recession, they were able to grow quite quickly. So this idea that Prof. Justin was talking about growth it is an enabling factor. Whether or not it's sufficient or not depends on the context, and that's very important. But be that as it may, Finland saw the unemployment rate recover to single digits in the early 2000s. And what really happened with Finland is that this was powered a lot by services, business services, specifically in education, social care. They were very deliberate in the sectors. The government chose winners based on their context. One of the other things as well during recovery was that they saw quite a strong increase in self-employment rates. And that was really the alternative to formal job markets that was able to cushion a lot of the blow of the recession. Last thing to also say is that when we're talking about this idea of solidarity, they were able to manage to attain 0% wage increases just as the recession was peaking across the board, across the country. But in subsequent recovery years, what they saw as well is that the boom industry saw relatively sharp rises in wages. So there was this idea that there was a delay, and once things turned around, a lot of the share of the income that attributed to the labor force did increase quite sharply as well. Final high-income country, depending on where you sit, sometimes ideologically, we looked at Russia, and this idea that Russia was a very paradoxical case in that they had a mixture of rigidity and flexibility that helped with their labor market resilience, and I'll show you why in a minute. So the transition into, from the former USSR, there was a lot of centralization that they inherited in their new dispensation, and that meant that real wages could really, either caps or declines could be enacted very broadly in times of crisis and very uniformly. That being said, they have very stringent employment protection laws. So the cost of dismissing a worker is actually quite high relatively in Russia. So firms would typically respond to that through a combination of reducing working hours as well as wages, rather than outrightly dismissing workers. Additionally, what they employed is a sort of a two-tier wage system. So you had a portion of your wage that was fixed, somewhat guaranteed, rigid, not easily altered, and then there was a very variable, flexible one. And the variable part tended to be tied very closely with how a firm performed. And that saw quite wide boom and bust cycles in sort of the wages that employees were subjected to, but there was this fixed part that was always an underlying bedrock. That being said, what that allowed firms to do is to adjust their variable pay during downturns, and they prioritized job retention over sort of rigid wage structures there. And so every time the Russian economy declined, you saw salaries decline and compress in companies. But when the economy improved, salaries also rebounded to a fairly material extent. Looking at our first upper middle income country, developing country, we saw China see a large scale reallocation of labor from what was sort of their rural areas into the urban economy, in part responding to demand. And this is a key theme throughout China, is that they were able to incentivize and sort of stoke demand in the services sector that they had identified as an increasingly strategic sector. The migration was heavily regulated. That being said, there were almost jobs that were cordoned off for sort of migrants moving from rural to urban areas, and a lot of the conditions and sort of the quality of the jobs were not necessarily what one would like. That being said, China also established a very strong informal sector that accounted for a significant share of the economy. Almost 60% of the urban employment in China by sort of the mid-2000s was from in the informal sector. Small enterprises, again, was a deliberate push by policymakers. What we see now in sort of the spread of employment is that large firms really account for less than 20% of total employment in the Chinese economy, which is largely at odds with our situation. And again, this is the consequence of deliberate government support, specific interventions around innovation, around the cost of borrowing, around building SMME-specific financial aid. Indonesia, the services sector is essentially what dominates in its workforce. It absorbs nearly half of the workforce. The informal sector is a key determinant in that respect. Excuse me. Small and micro enterprises are over 90, or nearly 100% of all the establishments in the country, the registered ones at least. There is a very large informal, unregistered economy as well. That being said, we must flag that there are very low measures of job quality associated with these jobs. There is quite a strong sense of labor market insecurity. Many workers earn less than the minimum wage. And there is also a measurement issue where the low unemployment also masks a lot of the segments of society that are excluded, particularly women from the labor market. Our final case study, again, like Indonesia, what we saw in Mexico, in its ability to keep unemployment in sort of single digits, was this idea that micro-enterprises and informal sector was able to absorb a lot of the workforce during shocks. Low social protection in Mexico was actually found to be a catalyst towards the informal sector. So individuals had to essentially look for odd marginal jobs for survival where they couldn't get counted as unemployed and qualify for unemployment benefits that itself was quite thin. Microenterprises, again, were these champions of unemployment. That being said, there was very low compliance with labor codes versus workers that were employed in large firms. There has been some progress in improving sort of the overall business environment and business regulation, and that is key in just how much easier it is for local entrepreneurs to operate in Mexico, and they're even offshoring jobs from their much richer neighbors to the north. There's been quite a strong improvement across the board in terms of access to infrastructure, electricity specifically. Cross-border trade has been made there have been quite a strong advances in that respect. In sort of dispute resolution, that's also been bolstered quite a lot, and that's really improved how informal firms work and the ability of informal firms to ultimately formalize, even if that's not their express intention. Second last slide to talk about trade-offs. So the red bit is if you take nothing else away from the slide, which is very useful in the case of myself, where I can't retain a lot of information. So really, the trade-offs in a lot of these countries, what we're finding is that there's this tension between the quality and the quantity of work. Mexico and Indonesia's case, they owe a large part of their sustained low unemployment to very uncertain, very precarious informal work. Many workers in China lack access to adequate social security measures. There's this also tension in a lot of the case studies with regards to worker protections versus what are broadly encompassed called job enabling reforms. So in Germany, a lot of the much lauded reforms found, or there was an outcome there that there was a lot of wage inequality where a lot of the promotion around jobs at the lower end did see a wage inequality rise in Germany. Russia's economy prioritizing job retention over wage stability was also a key where you saw quite big swings in wages in Russia. The underlying point here again to emphasize is that choices are politically and socially fraught. Last slide, just before I hand over to the next presenter, is around what can we do in our context. So what we found are the key lessons to draw from South Africa's context is this idea that we can expand services-led growth, but it does need the enabling infrastructure. It does need the ability to set up firms to be a lot easier than it is. This again speaks to this idea of self-employment and self-enterprise. Cutting red tape, etc., is something that I think I'm preaching to the converted here. But this idea that the policymakers are very deliberate in targeting self-employment and informal employment, that's something that came through a lot in the case studies. We need to think about how best to recalibrate labor market institutions. We need to have a conversation around flexibility and innovation against labor saving, against labor protections, and that, frankly, is above my pay grade, but these are important conversations to have. We're going to speak today around active labor market policies, and again, a key theme that came through a lot of the case studies was around having evaluations readily available and really rationalizing and tweaking what doesn't work. Spatial inequality is important for us, as it was in other EMs where you saw a mass migration from rural to urban areas. We need to think about improving transport. We really need to think about whether zoning laws are serving us and whether we can bring people closer to jobs and rather not the other way around. I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Boo. Nyeko, you are up and our last speaker before we open for discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Nyeko Mawunda. Gumbi apologized for flu. I'll apologize for lack of sleep. I have an unemployed 31-year-old that decided to move in with me. And he snores. He's my nephew. He calls himself unemployed, but he has a car and does Ubering. So he does have an income, but because he doesn't have a salary, he calls himself unemployed. But he snores. That's the part that I have to apologize about. So that's part of the things that we have to talk about when we talk about the labor market. The issue of income generation as well as employment. And it's something that is a conversation that most of our discussion seems to miss. When we were in Gauteng, Michael will recall, we had a story where we wanted to move to decant, that's the word that we used, Alexandra, and move a number of people that were in Alexandra to a place next to the Baklu, which is owned by Witwatersrand, by the way. And we're supposed to build social housing there and all of that. This old woman told us and said, I get a SASSA grant, old age grant. I then also get 18,000 Rand from the people that are renting in my backyard. And now that means that I have 20,000 Rand that is not taxed, that comes straight to me. You want to move me to a nice place, but I will have no income. Yeah? So now there's a debate that we really need to understand. And when we talk about the labor market, we need to also understand what is it that we're talking about. Income generation and wages. But anyway, I do have a number of colleagues that are with me in the space around, and they will answer some of the difficult questions that are raised. They are the experts in terms of the research that we conduct. But I have to explain that in terms of our priorities, the minister has given us 3 priorities that she has then agreed with the president as part of the presidential minister performance agreement. The 3 are that we must promote safer working environments, we must also facilitate employment, we must also be partners in terms of advocating engagements with employers. And all of these will be done with, in terms of creating a social net for vulnerable workers. And we also have to have a policy balance. So when Gumbi was talking there, he spoke about the need to be flexible. So you do need to have a policy balance in terms of how do we prevent worker exploitation, but also enable the creation of stable and predictable environments that attract business investments as well as job creation. We also have to address the issues that Ngidi spoke about earlier on the issue of transforming the economy and the labor market because of our historical injustices that we had. And in addition to that, you have what we call a dual mission, because we have to address those trio priorities. The dual mission talks about the promotion of economic growth, but also the elimination of the false narrative that decent work and job creation cannot go hand in hand. I think it's a false policy issue that, as Gumbi mentioned earlier. And one of the key issues that we're talking about in terms of the agenda when we're promoting all this the trio priorities is that We need to have social dialogue so that we understand what is it that the employers need, what is it that the employees need, and what is it that those that seek employment need, those that are in the studying and so forth and so forth. And again, the data that is coming out is saying to us we need to be adaptable in terms of the rules that we have so that we support small businesses and emerging industries, especially those ones in the gig and platform economy, but also what we call catalytic industries, such as those in the textile industries, agriculture, and the just energy transition that we have. Now, colleagues have spoken about this, so I'm not going to go through it. I think the Stats SA yesterday spoke about it, and Visache earlier on spoke about the statistics in terms of unemployment, whether it is found. But it's very important for us to know that in 2019, the president changed the name of the department from the Department of Labor to the Department of Employment and Labor. And that was not just a cosmetic change, and that's why we are now even talking about the reforms that we're trying to bring into the department, so that we also elevate the part of employment creation in addition to the issue of decent work and the likes. And there are changes that are coming in, including the separation of the funds, the compensation fund and the UIF, from the department into Schedule 3A entities in terms of the national entities, so that they are able to function in a manner that allows them to actively input into the labor market and have those changes that they need to do. Now, there is a lot of challenges that we have in society, and the biggest one is that, in government rather, and I want to be bold here. I think the biggest failure of the democratic government since 1994 has been the lack of communication. We have a lot of information, we have a lot of initiatives that we're taking, but we do not communicate. I will give you an example in terms of what we do. When there is a strike or service delivery protest, most people see government coming out and saying, no, actually we'll be bringing the road next week. But we all know that roads are not built in a week, or they're not brought in a week. It means that there was a plan that it was supposed to be there. Recently, there has been a march on illegal immigration and illegal or undocumented migrants in South Africa. And then government comes out and says, we actually have a new policy on managing labor migration. We have a new policy on the white paper on migration into the country. And this work started in 2022, 2023, from both the Department of Home Affairs and the Department of Employment and Labor. And now people are saying, you are responding to what we, the people, have been saying, instead of communicating that. So in the department, we have 2 units that actively conduct research, and that's why I can confirm all these issues that are being raised by colleagues. But what we do is that when we finish with the research, we post it on the website and hope that someone is going to come and have a look at it, which then becomes a problem. And the first unit is the one that actively look at labor market information and statistics. We collect the information, we analyze the information on labor market data, and we provide that information to inform planners, National Treasury, Statistics South Africa, SADC, the AU, the cabinet, the colleagues in government. They use this information. We also have the Research Policy and Planning Unit, a full planning unit, research unit within the department. And with that, we actively plan for research within BRICS. We drafted the terms of references. We work with colleagues from the HSRC, in academia, and we produce a number of documents and reports annually that I can tell none of you will know unless if you are actively working in us or in the labor market. Okay, I was still safe, I guess. But I wanted to highlight a number of them. For me, the biggest ones is that we have what we call the annual industrial action report. And that industrial action report looks at the industrial actions and labor peace within the country. We hear a lot of people saying that there's a lot of strikes, work stoppages, and all of that. But none of us try to understand what is it that causes those things and what are the impacts of those things. And that's what we're trying to have with that. This is a report that we produce annually. I don't know how many of you knows about that report. We also have a report that looks at job opportunity and unemployment in the SA labor market. Now, this report looks at which positions are in the labor market that are difficult to fill. And that way we can say these are the scarce skills. Universities, please start training in this area. Government departments, employers, provide bursaries in this area. And these are things that are actively intervening in the labor market. But we don't share that information, and I hope that with this type of engagements with GTAC and partnering with us, we will be able to start sharing so that colleagues can understand. And there are a number of interesting studies that we have done throughout the years, including how the synthesis of labor legislation or an investigation into the rigidity and flexibility of labor laws. So we wanted to see what is it that people are saying. When they say that labor laws are rigid, what does that mean? And what we found out is that it means that if you are an employer, Gumbi, you just want to be able to wake up one day and say, Nyiko, you are fired. And that's what all the employers said. They say, it's my company, I must have that flexibility. Then we come back and say, but you also have to understand that South Africa is a human rights-based society. Workers' rights are unalienable human rights. You cannot separate the two. So there must be processes that addresses and allows you to be followed so that you can have that sense of fairness. So what is it that makes us want to regulate? Because we were asked the question before, why do you want to, why do you think you must regulate the labor market? And we have the Constitution. We are one of about, I think, 3 countries in the world that have as constitutional rights, a basic human right, labor relations, a fair labor practices. I think it's only 3 countries in the world in the Constitution. So if we have that in the Constitution, you'll understand in the history that was being shared earlier, why would want to have that? So you need to find a balance between employers, job creation, as well as the rights of individuals as basic human rights. We also have a lot of collective agreements with the organized labor, with business as well. We also have a lot of bilateral cooperations. You know, surprisingly, South Africa has a lot of bilateral agreements with countries where we are allowed to send labor to these countries, but we do not communicate that. We only communicate about those countries that send labor to us, and we need to start marketing those areas so that young South Africans can take the opportunities that we have there. We also have multilateral organizations, agreements that we have, or obligations with the SADC, with the African Union. With the SADC now, we're working in partnership with States SA to align with on the SADC labor statistic protocol that will allow us to know across the SADC region the issues related to the labor market, the issues related to labor migration, what the challenges are, what are the pull factors, what are the push factors, so that we can start even addressing not only South African needs, but also the regional needs that we have. I'm trying to move as fast as possible. I know it's a lot of information. I wanted to read this quote by Minister Met. You know, in government, I'm shocked you didn't quote Minister Kodongwana, but he spoke yesterday, so you are fine. In government, you have to quote your minister so that you remain relevant. That's a joke. I've also heard that in the social media, you have to post your boss once a year so that your boss can know that you're still, aligned. Anyway, I quote, it says, when she was delivering the budget vote speech, she said, South Africa faces a structural unemployment crisis. Our mandate cannot just be about protecting those who already have jobs. It must actively welcome those who are excluded. However, creating any job at any cost is a trap. Working poverty destroys social cohesion. Our challenge is to build a regulatory environment that is firm on rights but flexible on formalization. And that means that it actually reflects on what my colleagues from the HSRC will talk about. Because when we looked at the youth employment poverty solutions adopted by government in the research that we did, we found that there is a need for understanding that high unemployment requires rapid job creation. But it also means that when you look at unregulated growth, there is a challenge there that you are going to have a lot of exploitation and worker poverty. The statistics that we have from inspections show that the biggest industries that are exploitative and hire large numbers of illegal immigrants are the ones that are quite low on regulation. Those are agriculture and construction. And that's where you have a lot of exploitation and non-payment of national minimum wage. And last is that whilst the solution is a regulated flexibility that allows maneuver, it also lowers the issues of barriers of entry. And the BEEI, not the BBE, not the triple BE, the BEEI is a project actually funded by the Unemployment Insurance Fund from the Department of Employment and Labor. We're almost done, yeah. So all of those things are reflecting on the challenges that are being spoken about earlier. And in this current financial year, in terms of our APP, we will be doing two major reports. One will be looking again on the impact of labor legislation and employment creation so that we can come back and report on what the challenges are and what the opportunities are. And then the next one will be the issue of labor market trends. I wanted to highlight, as I move towards closure, the issue of why we need to have compliance. The first one is that when you look in the vulnerable industries like construction, especially the ones that we say are going to make our economy to be a construction space, that when you are unable to comply, those that are undercutting or are not complying, they are able to underbid, so they come into the environment and say, we'll pay at the lower rate. They lead to substandard working conditions. Then you have the buildings that are collapsing all over the country, the infrastructure that is falling off. They have illegal employment practices, and all of this undermines the economy. So it's not a matter of whether you need to comply or not. It's also a matter of whether the economy is supposed to be working in the way in which we're working. I'm going to move a little bit because I wanted to talk about what we are actually doing as a department to address the issue of unemployment and the economy. The first one is we have a project called the Labor Activation Program, which we have revised actually, and it is an investment in the economy, where we want to target what we call catalytic industries, such as those in technology, those that are in green energy, just energy transition, in construction, in textile. We also want, with the revised strategy, it says that whatever you do, the beneficiaries must be 70% youth. And we also have the public employment portal, within the department where we say to young people, register your CV, and we have partnered with 1,000 CEOs, and we say to them, advertise on the platform. And we will take the responsibility to verify and vet the young people that are there, so that you cannot claim that you cannot find job opportunities or you cannot find skills in the economy that are there. We're also removing the issue of barriers to entry. Young people have said to us in the work integrated learning, the WIL, they are not able to complete their studies because they finish the theoretical work, but the physical work they are not able to do. I see a lot of young people nodding on the floor, and we have said as a Department of Higher Education and Training, give us the list of those that have completed the theoretical planning, the theoretical part of it. They gave us a list of 39,000 young people that cannot graduate because they do not have WIL part of their training. And we have said we will allocate you to positions and will pay stipends so that you are able to go to jobs, you are able to buy clothes to allow you to be in those areas. But we'll also provide some skills auditing or skills analysis, provide career path counseling, provide career guidance and pathways so that you are able to move beyond just the WIL part and be able to move to the next level of jobs.